You're listening to the Companion Gun Dog Podcast. I'm your host, Grayson Geyer. And today it's Althea and I out on the water. It's Sunday, June 1st. Beautiful day. First beautiful day we've had in like 6 days. We've had rain every day. And my hope today was to get out here on a local reservoir and do a little sight fishing for carp, but I knew as I looked at the forecast that we were going to be blown out, and we are. Super muddy up here, very turbid water, but I'm going to get out here on this flat anyway and paddle around and chat with you guys. This is my first time coming to this flat. It's something I've wanted to do for a while, but I've had this like slow burn over the last maybe 3 years for trying to catch a carp fish or carp on the fly. And I am slightly embarrassed to say that I have not done that in 3 years of trying. I've had a couple of eats. I've never gotten one to the boat. And I really, mostly the eats I have had, I just yank it right out of their mouth. So saying I didn't really get one. The only one I got hooked up was on and took my lure pretty quick. So I don't have extremely high hopes for today is what I'm getting at, but it's a really good way to pass the time. I was really proud of myself for getting up really early yesterday and tinkering with my trolling motor and splicing the wire and making it a little longer so I could get the battery up to the front, and got all my gear together and was really stoked about all this. And then I knew, I always do, I left out excited and in a hurry this morning to kind of get here to motor up the lake. It's about a 2-mile run from where you're allowed to launch here. Got my trolling motor hooked up, and I don't know what's happened to my battery, but I could only make about 2 miles an hour, 2.5 if I got the wind right. So it was a long, slow motor up here. I guess I'm low voltage, so we'll find out if we'll be paddling the 2 miles home from here. And I'm sure that'll make my wife extremely happy. Something else I did was leave my push pole at home, which is pretty important because it also acts as my anchor pin. And that's going to make it a challenge. And I could just grab a beaver cutting, but I'm actually sitting here, I think, looking at a carp. He was doing a little bubbling, and he's not bubbling now. I want him to be actively feeding. Maybe you guys, I don't think so, but we're going to take a shot at this. I couldn't tell you where his head is right now if I wanted to. We're going to take a little shot at this carp. One shot, I'm either going to spook him, and I don't even see him anymore, but I'm pretty sure I had him over here. Might have been a turtle. I just had a little shadow in there, so I'm not going to take the shot. But I am going to leave some line out for the next time that happens, so I don't have to sit here and strip and all that mess. And let's put that paddle away for a second while I do that. So yeah, so that's what I'm doing today while I'm talking to you guys. And so before we get started, I want to talk about a little something I've put together. I published I guess you call it a Patreon page or a Patreon site. I'm not sure what the nomenclature is. It's something that quite a few of my contemporaries have done. I've really resisted that. I'm not huge on thinking of myself as an influencer, but I also recognize the value of social media as a marketing tool. And, and as we've talked about in the past, something that's really important to me is trying to keep my business small. And so this is just one way to kind of add an income stream. and I've talked about how much joy the podcast brings me, and it's not free. I got one tailing over there. Let's move over to him. Oh yeah, he's really up and moving. Um, and so there's, maybe just a way to kind of cover the cost. If I do that, I'll be happy. We've talked about a little bit of that from an advertising perspective in the past, and just it's really tough, man. I'm not sure I ever want to do any brand representation stuff. It would have to be really the right thing. But either way, I've got a Patreon. The first thing I did was it's been a couple of months ago, I built a webinar on, really it's mostly about map scouting for woodcock. And of course, it's going to have a little bit of a southeastern slant, as that's where I live. But I did a little bit of natural history stuff, a little bit of biology and ecology, but of course, those are not my fields of expertise. And I mean, not that I'm an expert on hunting woodcock, but I've done a whole lot of it. But I built a webinar on that. I'll be presenting at an upcoming event that's co-hosted by Project Upland and the Rough Grouse Society in Winston-Salem. But that's available. The webinar is available on that Patreon now. So I had it behind a paywall for a bit. I didn't like it. The service was expensive. It's like any of these things you put up, you kind of have to feed the machine to get them going right. And I don't know, it's just another thing to pay for that I'm not sure I'm going to put the time and effort in to make it worthwhile. But with the Patreon, what I like is like you can subscribe. I feel like that Woodcock 101 webinar is worth the $5, considering how much time and effort I put into it and what I would charge for it normally. So jump in there, $5, you get Woodcock 101. And then also what I've done is I'm lucky right now I've got a helper that can film while I'm doing my group classes. So yesterday we did a group class. We filmed quite a few of the dogs we worked during the group class and kind of talked our way through them. And I started that one with a lecture that we didn't film, but I'm going to go back, and this is what I'm going to do today, is kind of re-record that lecture that started the group class. And so the topic of the lecture is kind of a holistic approach to retrieving, or what is retrieving, right? So I spend my summers focusing primarily on really force fetching dogs, but it's a retriever basics program, but I put a lot of bird dogs and spaniels through it as well. And I just think it's it's the standard, in my opinion, for the foundation of what it takes to build either a good field trial retriever, hunt test retriever, even a good gun dog. You don't have to have it to have a good gun dog, but it's a great fundamental skill. And so it's not just the force fetch, it's what you might consider an entire force program. So we get through the force fetch, take them to the ground, walking fetch, pile work onto the T pattern, get some handle on them, and do some water work as well, and try to get some disciplinary casting before they go home. And if I can get them running a cold blind, that's a bonus. But either way, that's what I enjoy about it. I'm not a big, I don't do much hunt testing with retrievers, and I got nothing against it. It's just, but I do really, really enjoy the basics in that American style basic program. But I also, we've talked about this in the past, with my own dogs, I really like to use food and build a nice mechanical retrieve with food first. And then I've got a lot of ideas as well about when in your puppy development phase, or even if you've got an older dog and you're considering starting this work, I think something that's really important is play. Play and just that kind of untenable social side of retrieving that doesn't get talked a lot about in training circles. I think the Brits are big on, that's really the foundation of what people might consider a British program, and I really respect and admire what they do over there, and I think they've got some fantastic dogs, and I think it also shows in their genetics, some of it good, maybe some of it that I I am wary of in terms of what it can produce, but the same goes for any of the American genetics as well. So I think, I guess my point to this whole topic is I think that there's a lot of utility in many approaches to the way we train retrieving as a skill, and I think a lot of that gets overlooked, or sometimes we feel like we're in competition. If you train with food, you're competing with a guy that trains with traditional pressure or compulsive systems. If you're into British stuff, everything else stinks. If you're an American guy, and this is obviously a generalization. There are a lot of thoughtful people that aren't arrogant about it, but I do think we tend to camp off, and this is one of those places I see as camping off, right? If I do it this way, everything else sucks, or everything else is inhumane, or it's not good enough. It's not gonna hold up when the chips are down, type of stuff. And all of those, like all generalizations, like there's like seeds of truth in that stuff, but it doesn't represent the whole picture very well, in my opinion. And so, so we spent yesterday just talking about, like, how can you just look at retrieving as a big picture type of deal, and how can you incorporate all of it? And I think you can. I don't think you have to pick one over another. I think you can do any of those things and all of those things, maybe not simultaneously, but congruently, or do them in some sort of order that works best for you. I guess the natural order would be, in your puppy development phase, to spend a lot of time developing a bond with your puppy. And I think American guys do this. I think a lot of, or American trainers do this. Spend a lot of time bonding with the pup, spend a lot of time playing with the pup, have little tricks and tips for how to get them wanting to retrieve to you. And then you have the food crowd. And in America, like, we got a few different camps on that end. Some people do it because they have some sort of moral kind of, I don't know, distrust, or some sort of preconceived notion about what force fetch is, and the fact that it potentially is inhumane or what have you. And I think we've addressed a lot of that in previous podcasts, and I don't need to rehash it. But what I've always said is, like, if you don't feel comfortable with something, especially if it gives you the kind of the moral squirmies, like, by all means, like, don't do that, man. You should do whatever you want to do. And there's tons of power in training with food, and you can build beautiful mechanics with it. And then dogs that are well habituated to doing good work tend to do more good work, so you can have, I think, a reliable retriever, even one that maybe was not a great natural retriever, with a food-based system. And so, and of course, I've talked about my beliefs on force fetch at length in the past, and you can go back and listen to those as well. But I'm a huge believer in that style of training, to kind of finish a dog off, at least from a foundational perspective. And so, I guess just kind of run over each one, talk a little bit about what's important. Maybe, I don't know if I'll find any myths in there. I'm not extremely well prepared. I'm just going based on memory of where I shot from the hip yesterday on this lecture. But I think that the first thing to think of is, like, what is retrieving? Just answer that question, right? It's obviously a process where a dog goes and gets something and brings it to you. Like, I guess its simplest definition is, a dog, there's an item that you want, and you send your dog to go get it, and it comes back, and it presents it to you, and it hands it to you, in a way that doesn't destroy the item, at the very least. And so I would say that's retrieving. But I do think it's a lot more than that. And I think especially from a social perspective, I think there's a lot going on in a retrieve. And so when we think of a dog that wants to maybe chase an item, certainly wants to possess an item, like that's usually a prey-based behavior, right? So we're talking about the predatory sequence: chase, capture, kill, or chase, capture, possess, maybe ingest, maybe hunt for it first. But what we do know is we got this one thing, whether we've conditioned it in the dog or whether it's natural, this one thing that the dog wants desperately. They go out, they pick it up, they have enough desire to possess it, to retain possession of it, but yet they bring it back to you. And so some of them, I've had puppies that really did that kind of right off the jump. And I would say that those puppies had like high social characteristics, right? They were in that, that was kind of their thing. They just loved attention. They loved affection. They solicited attention and affection all the time, but they also had prey and the desire to go get this item. And if we have that, and I think this is what the Brits are really masters of in their puppy development, especially, if we have that, then we can encourage it. We can promote it. We can reinforce it, right? And I've done this with my little Springer recently, Billie Jean. She's got all those things. She's a ton of prey, ton of possession, and also tons of like that affectionate social drive that really, to me, is like, I've always struggled to talk about it because we know it exists. I mean, it's absolutely real. The whole training your dog with praise thing, and the oxytocin exchange, and just the big love fest you can have over and to help promote behaviors. It absolutely works. Just doesn't fit maybe into as tidy a little box as food or prey, right? In terms of positive reinforcement or negative punishment. But it does work. And I think, you see most really good trainers, regardless of what method or style or camp they subscribe to, most good trainers just do this intuitively and they do it well. But the Brits really, like I said, they kind of have a lot of, and I won't say they have, I think it's unfair to paint all Brits and, with the same brush. There's plenty that are not afraid to use compulsion. I would venture to say that England as a country is not free of e-collars. It may not, they may be illegal or they may be uncouth. But I guarantee they exist over there, and I guarantee there are people using them over there. And I think, when I watch videos of retriever trials in England, and you can watch them change, because you can catch the Paul French videos for about 20 years worth, maybe more, and you can see the dog work change. It's not, I wouldn't call it better or worse, but I would say the lines have gotten tighter, the handling's gotten snappier. So my guess is that, some of the things that may have been developed over here have made their way over there, or maybe not. Maybe they've been slowly developing over there. And either way, it doesn't matter. And I got no problem with any of that. So, but I do like, though, in their thoughts of what puppies are, and there is a camp over there that doesn't like things changing the way it is. They want to see the dogs hunt their way out. They're not looking for as much precision as maybe we are, or the trend may be, that may be occurring over there. What's important to them is that they have a calm, quiet companion that is affectionate and easy to be around, and when called into action, can operate independently, but yet still operate in tandem with the handler. And I think that's important. I think having that gene pool, I think having that mentality over there is important, especially since there's a contingent over here that are into it. And I'm into it. I'm just not, I'm not only into it, right? But I appreciate it very much. And when you watch these guys work puppies, one thing I did a lot of with Billie Jean I think is really cool is, hey, you throw the item out there, the puppy brings it back. You don't even worry about the item, man. Just the fact that you're willing to come back into my sphere of influence with this item that's of such high value to you, I'm just going to love you as hard as I possibly can. We're going to have this huge, praise, affection, tactile, stimulation from loving and rubbing and petting and happy squeaky voices and all that stuff. And I have done a ton of that with Billie Jean, and I would say it has been extremely effective. And slowly over time, with no food and no pressure, shaped a very serviceable delivery. It's not tidy, and I think I would, it'd be nice to have one of those, guys from across the pond that does a lot of that stuff to help guide me. Because she is still a little possessive enough that she might take a lap or she may verge off at the last second, but she never maintains that. She just kind of runs wide, maybe does a little lap around me, and then when she gets close enough for me to put my finger on her head and start scratching, she just sits on her butt and loves it, and and eventually yields the ball and or bumper or whatever it happens to be and turns it over to me, and that's great. And that's all I've done to this point with her, but we've done a whole lot of it, and it's working with live game. I'm back to backing off the live game with her, because that's another thing that they do over there, and I think I'm trying to just emulate what those guys do. I just think it's an interesting and exciting process, and with Ripple, I did my best to emulate, and Ripple's the yellow lab I worked and took some film of and spoke about. I did my best to emulate what was going on in Nipopo right now without having actually been a part of that ecosystem. And I loved it. I had a lot of fun with it and worked out really well. I did at the very end kind of just turn it into a proper force fetch, because I just felt like I was reaching for that. But at the end of the day, I mean, if I had sat with that and stuck with it the whole time, I think it would have been fantastic and fine. And so I'm just spooking fish right out the front of the boat right now. Wind's picking up, of course, which means it's going to be in my face, and I'm going to end up having to paddle all the way home. That'll be fun. But back to Ripple, right? So that, and I guess that brings me to my next point. So we talked about like what that natural thing is. It's really just making it so the dog wants to be with you and wants to share its high value item with you, isn't afraid that you're some sort of threat to take it away from it, but more than that, wants to engage you over it. And this, a lot of times, with the protection sport crowd, and I did a little bit of this in class yesterday, this is it's easy to, I wouldn't say easy, but it's a much cleaner process to develop that if you've got a game of tug. So you can kind of go from dead prey to live prey. You make the prey more valuable while the puppy's engaging you with it, or the dog's engaging you with it. And then all of a sudden they really want to re-engage you with it, because that's when it's at its most fun, is when you're playing a little game of tug. And so that absolutely will help you get a dog to bring something back to you if that lights a fire in them. And I don't have a problem with people doing that when they're making a gun dog and wanting it to retrieve. That said, I mean, obviously you're going to have to overcome that if that's what the dog's, is obsessively wanting to tug with you when it gets back with either bumpers or game or whatever. So you're creating something that you may have to deal with at some point. But at the end of the day, if like the dog responds really well to that and is not responding to other things as well, and you want to focus on developing the natural part, I think that's a great way to go about doing it. And if you're willing to put the time and the effort in, you're going to overcome whatever issues you may create doing it. And I think that's an important part of dog training, is like not being afraid to dig a hole and dig yourself out, and it's fun, and that's how we learn. And we're all here doing it as a hobby. I mean, most people, I would assume, listening to this podcast are not just duck hunters, with a good old lab. They don't care about training. I think we all tend to geek out on this stuff and want to know more. And with that, to me, that's a part of that process. That's a part of learning and growing as a trainer is making mistakes. That's the trial and error, and I don't believe in errorless learning, or at least I don't believe in errorless learning uh, being superior to trial and error. I think trial and error is just a natural way of doing things, and I think it's far superior to whatever anybody might consider errorless learning. So let's put it that way. So go try things, make mistakes, and fix them. And always, like I said, but as long as you're maintaining some sort of moral compass while you're doing it. When we make mistakes, we always want to err on the side of protecting our dogs and their drive and their emotional well-being. And that doesn't mean we don't use compulsion. It doesn't mean that we're always easy on our dogs. We may ask a lot of our dogs, and I appreciate that. And that's a part of what I do. So there, that's the big, the big social picture. I guess I didn't get into the weeds too deep about the training systems you can use, but there's a lot of people out there doing it. And so I would suggest if that's something you're interested in doing, like any of the Brits with YouTube channels, like that's what you're going to find for the most part, is that kind of work. And I think I watch a lot of that stuff, and there's some really good ones out there. One guy I like a lot, I guess I'll give some plugs to, is the Hampshire Spaniel training guy. He does a good job. I think he's honest. He's not just over markety. A lot of the YouTube stuff can be more about like self-promotion than actual education. And that guy, I think he's into teaching and does a good job of it. So I watch him a lot. And even though he's focused primarily on spaniels, the stuff he does, especially in terms of retrieving, is going to be very similar to what you would do with a retriever, with that mentality. And so if you're looking for more specific, I'll stick with that one dude. But if you're looking for something more specific and you want to learn about, the whole process, and what the way they do all the social stuff from puppy development up to shaping a clean delivery, I would look at that guy. And then moving into the food stuff. From a technical perspective, I've talked a lot about this again. So, run back in the podcast, look up the early stuff. But reward-based training systems, we've talked about technical aspects of them. They work. They just flat out work. Number one, if you have a dog without food drive, then you're probably overfeeding your dog, or you can fix it relatively quickly by dealing with their feeding schedule. Every once in a while, I'd say a lot of dogs without, quote unquote, without food drive really fall more on like a environmental stability spectrum that keeps them from wanting to engage someone over food. But even with that said, I'm sure there are plenty of dogs out there that don't have the level of food drive that you may want to use in training, but I think more do than people realize. But training with food is extremely powerful. Most dogs can do it. The great majority of dogs can do it, will do it, and will be, I won't say happy doing it. This is something I went over in my group class yesterday. Is like, to me, I think like high level, especially when we're talking about shaping a mechanical retrieve with food, or a mechanically accurate and appropriate and precise retrieve through delivery with food, that's a really, really challenging task. And to me, it is the thing I find most stressful personally when I'm doing it, even though like I've done it enough that I can manage. I do better than I used to at falling apart. But also it's stressful for the dog. When you're getting in, you're building this desire. You're making, we're building food drive, we're working in food drive, we're asking the dog to perform very complex tasks, and if they're willing to stay in because it's going to satisfy them somehow, they got to want it pretty bad. And if they do, they can get super stressed out over it. And I would venture to say that maybe not as stressy as you might find in more compulsive methods, i.e. the force fetch, in terms of peaking. But I think over a long-term like if I'm taking on a clicked or a marked retrieve, I think the dog will spend a longer time in an elevated period of distress in that system than they will in a force fetch with me. Now, I think that the level of distress where it peaks will probably be higher at some point or at several points in the force fetch. But usually, once dogs begin to understand with clarity what's being asked of them and they're prepared for the adversity that they're going to face in a force fetch program, I think they tend to gain a lot of confidence, and I think the stress levels really begin to even out and to fall off. And so I guess that's, what I'll say about it. If you want to learn more about the technical aspects of all of those things, if you're looking for food-based stuff, I really like, and this is not just a plug because she's my friend, even though she is, Emily does a fantastic job. So Emily Shirey of Horizon Retrievers and Short Hairs and Shotguns, she has a Patreon where she actually walks people through a deep, a very in-depth trained retrieve. She does layer pressure in there, but I'm sure she would work with you if you chose not to as well. But it's all built around food reward in the early phases, at least. And then her pressure layering, is more what I would say is just good dog training, right? And maybe I don't know that it comes from the Napopo, which is kind of recently taken off in popularity and with their unforced force fetch. And I do think they are not just layering pressure. I think they're using pressure in a way, and I don't want to speak too technically on it, because I don't do it, and it's not fair. I'm not a representative of them, but I also don't want to misrepresent them. But I like it. I think they, to me, Bart Bellin is on the Mount Rushmore of dog trainers. And so I would absolutely want to learn from that guy given the opportunity. But that said, that's a blended food reward. It's going to have prey activity in it as well, with some compulsion, with negative reinforcement and positive punishment mixed in throughout. And you're going to get that with Emily, maybe just, in that more traditional style of blending those things, like quote unquote balanced trainers have been doing for a very long time. It's none of that's, again, nothing's really new. And then when you want to talk about force fetch, again, it's something I've gone over at length, but also there's good options out there. Bob Owens has a great course that's available to purchase. He's also really, for a guy that's as busy as he is, and he is extremely busy, and he's got a lot of friends that he does a lot of stuff for, and a lot of clients that he does a lot of stuff for. But it's always impressive. My old man always said, if you want something done, ask a busy man. And Bob, I think, personifies that. And I think he does a really good job of doing his best to communicate with anybody that tries to communicate with him. So I would highly suggest Bob's course. Hard to not mention Freddie King, who I just love, man. He's got the retriever trainer. It's earthy, and so is Freddie, which I love. It's really cool. They're getting spookier now that I'm on my second lap around here and got my wind at my back. But yeah, Freddie King's retriever trainer program, you can just look it up, Google it. That dude, he's awesome. It's not a lot of people wanting to hear themselves talk, I guess you could call this, but I highly suggest that too for the more technical aspects of the force fetch. So I don't want to be too redundant with that, so you can go back again and find out all you want to find out about force fetch, but essentially to me, what I always call it is a master class in escape avoidance. But it is more than that. It's a master class in escape avoidance for both handler and dog. I think all of your skills will get better if you take it on and finish it and become good at it, right? So thank you for being with me today, guys. If you've considered joining that Patreon, it'd be a huge help to me. It would help me keep this thing rolling and justify it to my wife which is pretty important. It also keeps me in these canoes on these days because it's very important that I go out and record a podcast. And this is the only way I can do it now. So hopefully you catch my drift. So keep me on the canoe on Sunday afternoons or Sunday mornings, and stay in touch, man, and join my Patreon and give me $5. It would really help me a lot. So or don't, but listen and be cool. Thank you very much.